I'm going to find out to be called BBC. Big Blind Control.
Fela's song, Sorrows, Tears and Blood, can best describe, in my view, the attitude of the Nigerian civil society towards the political situation. The persistent wave of political gangsterism, burning down of homes of those considered as opponents, the climate of insecurity, which was the order of the day in the Nigerian contemporary politics of the early 60s, paved the way for the arrival of the military in the political arena. Moreover, the participation of Nigerian intellectuals in successive military regimes created the illusion of almost a peaceful democratic participation in government where none existed. It is not the duty of the army to rule or govern because it has no political mandate, and its duty is not to seek political mandate. Normally, the duty of the armed forces is to defend and support the civil government, not to overthrow it or usurp the duties of any branch of the government. The army can only operate under the mandate of the civil government. If national interest compels the armed forces to intervene, then immediately after such intervention, they must hand over to a new civil government elected by the people and enjoying the mandate of the people under a constitution accepted by the people. If the military were successful in holding power in Nigeria and indeed most African nations, thanks to the so-called intellectual community, they gave the technical and intellectual support that most military regimes needed to hold on to power. Greed and power were reasons why most intellectuals signed in on what Fela would call army arrangement. Another factor was fear. Fear is one factor that has kept black people in bondage for so long, people using family bonds as justification for their non-involvement in the struggle. Fela states in Sorrows, Tears and Blood that individual fears will not make the fight for progress, freedom, happiness and injustice disappear. For as long as there is fear, police and army brutality will always be a part of our daily lives, leaving in its wake sorrows, tears and blood. The lack of reaction from the Nigerian public towards all the physical attacks Fela was subjected to, despite all those sacrifices he made, openly criticizing successive military regimes, suffering police and army brutality, detained on numerous occasions in police and army jails for the same people who stood helplessly watching on the sideline as the army burned down his home and commune. On February 18, 1977, Fela was paraded naked on the street with the soldiers taunting and teasing him on their way to the nearby Abalti barracks. What happened to the need to organize and mobilize the Nigerian public to stand up and resist the draconian military dictatorship that led to the founding of YAP? From a hindsight today, what I described earlier as obvious to me that our struggle was losing its direction, reason for my decision to part ways with Fela was in fact a facade. By 1981, when Fela wrote and started to perform live the song Look and Laugh, he was more or less living a life that one could describe as a recluse. Fela, who loved to go out and participate in public lectures, symposiums, clubs, etc., suddenly was always found sleeping or playing sax at home with women around him. The only times he left his home was going to perform at the shrine. His old attitude of keeping abreast of events, giving lectures at universities and institutions of higher learning suddenly stopped. He rarely gave press conferences or press releases like he used to do. His justification in his change of attitude was his refuge in spiritual transformation, which I consider as a facade. Looking back, this is understandable if one considers the price the man had paid for the struggle, several beatings and arrests from the police, army, plus the fact that he was not getting any younger. Be that as it may, my position regarding all this was I do not believe after all his contribution that he should take that posture of look and laugh, hence my eventual departure from the organization. We tried with yap before the movement was proscribed by the Obasanjo regime. I have had the privilege to watch Fela perform on several occasions since our parting of ways, and from my observation, his artistic genius was still very much intact. What then could one attribute to the cause of his living a life that one could describe as a recluse? The only person capable of explaining his state of mind was Fela himself, and he did that with the song he wrote shortly after the advent of the spiritual transformation. It's one of those songs that could help us define correctly how the man felt then and towards the end of his life. Look and laugh was his answer to his near recluse state. Yap was purely a Nigerian thing. We did not have offices outside of the country. We had members who shortly after registration traveled outside Nigeria to pursue their studies or work abroad. But Yap was purely a Nigerian thing based on the idea of President Kwame Nkrumah and the Ghana Young Pioneer. We had the conviction that if we could mobilize the Nigerian masses, we could constitute our number into a force that would make us heard all over the continent. In reality, YAP was still at her formation stage when Obasanjo regime got us proscribed. We had almost about 10,000 registered members. Unfortunately, the YAP registers that were in my custody were burnt by my uncle with whom I was living at that time because of his fear of the military regime. This was shortly after the burning down of Kalakuta and my testimony before the Justice Anya Tribunal. Strange men in unmarked cars visited my uncle's apartment asking questions about me. I was forced to go on a self-imposed exile in Zaria for some time to cover my trail. It was during my absence that all the documents I kept in my little room were recovered by my uncle and burned. He said he did that to protect me from criminal charges if the NSO, the Nigerian Security Organization, laid their hands on the documents. During the week that followed the burning down of Kalakuta, deprived of our main source of finance because Fela was detained by the army for 28 days, to keep pressure on the military regime, the three of us decided to visit a YAP member named Ejeba, resident at Abule Chia village in Yoruba, a ghetto area near Ikeja known for production of cane chairs. We wanted a place where we could work without being disturbed, since our source of finance to print the YAP news was temporarily out of circulation. We had to decide what possible means available to pass our message to the public. Ejeba welcomed the three of us, and earlier on our way to his place, we had decided to post handwritten posters in strategic places all over Lagos. We asked him if we could use his house as a temporary operational base. He agreed, and we mapped out our line of action with our limited financial resources. Lemmy knew a printer friend who could give us poster-sized papers. We were aware also that very few printers will agree to print the messages we wanted to put across, afraid of possible reprisals from the army. Hence, we collected the poster-sized papers he was able to furnish us, and we went to work handwriting messages such as 1,000 soldiers attack Fela's house. What barbarism! Today it is Fela, tomorrow it could be you. Army are paid with public money to protect, not to destroy, etc. were the kind of messages that were handwritten on thousands of posters we produced. We signed all the posters on behalf of YAP, and for days we were holed up in Ejeba's place. We worked throughout the night, and early every morning we pasted the finished posters on moving buses and on public walls all over Lagos City. After Fela's release, to keep the pressure on the Obasanjo regime, we placed a coffin on the balcony of the burnt house with a banner inscribed boldly with the words, "This is the spot where justice was murdered." For about a year after the Nigerian army attack on Kalakuta, people driving or walking past the ruins were confronted with this symbol of defiance. I believe that it was more of Fela's sense of duty to his people and not the attitude of the civil society that contributed to the force that influenced his motivation to protest and sacrifice almost everything he owned for the struggle. Fela deeply believed in the African personality. He personified this concept of the African and the diaspora African. He was also a man that led by example. When we carried the symbolic coffin we placed on the balcony of the burnt house to Dodan Barracks as a parting gift to General Obasanjo, Fela led the march. Same when we deposited 12 buckets of human feces at MKO Abiola's Ikeja residence, the famous "Give me shit, I give you shit" apology Fela song. He drove the bus. He was no doubt human in the real sense of the word, with all the qualities and defaults of any human being. However, Fela had a sense of belonging, that African communal way of life that puts the community before the individual. For example, what Kalakuta Republic was before the burning down in 1977 was not Fela's idea of a Pan-African Republic as he would have loved to. Fela's personality, Kalakuta, and the Africa 70 organization constituted what could be described as a form of artistic and social rebellion. Kalakuta and Yap, like most things he was involved in, was still in their formative stages before the army burnt down Kalakuta. His credo was putting his money where his mouth was. It was no secret that Fela, in his capacity as founder and financer of Young African Pioneer Movement, bought a $40,000 printing machine for the publication of Yap News. We were still printing the copies of the newsletter with private printers, pending installation of our new printing machine. Fortunately, the printing machine was not yet installed in Kalakuta as earlier planned before the army burnt down the house. I, in fact, escaped being trapped in Fela's house on February 18, 1977 by air's breath. I had gone to the house to present the estimated cost to Fela for the construction of a space behind his house to install the newly purchased Yap News printing machine. As usual, at about that time, 10:30 a.m., Fela was in bed and I had to go speak to him through his bedroom window. He asked me to come back later in the day as he had just gone to bed. Since I had other appointments at the Yap office situated in the shrine a few meters away, I left the house with the idea to return in a few hours. I had hardly sat back in my chair at the Yap office when someone cried out that the army had encircled the house. Even musicians from Africa 70 group criticized the rationale of Fela's investment in the printing machine. They would have liked that Fela bought cars for them than spend the money for the struggle as he chose to. We really had planned to transform Yap News into a daily newspaper before Obasanjo's regime proscribed the movement. In conformity with the obvious situation we found us, Yap was proscribed, the house was in ruin, Fela was prevented from performing at the shrine, some members of the organization got scared and left, etc., etc. Despite all that we had been subjected to, there was no way we could give up the struggle, as you can hear from Fela's song, No Agreement, a song he wrote shortly after the burning down of Kalakuta Republic in 1977. Friends and childhood acquaintances of Fela tried to talk him out of confronting the Nigerian military authorities, stressing that government can do no wrong or government is too powerful to be confronted, etc. In response to their defeatist attitude, Fela in the song No Agreement stated clearly that he was in the struggle because he couldn't sit and watch fellow Africans going hungry or living homeless without talking against it. In an attempt to get justice in the Lagos High Court, Fela, on behalf of himself, the Kuti family, and the Africa 70 organization, sued the Nigerian Army Chief of Staff and some top-ranking officers from the nearby Abauti barracks, claiming 25 million naira, about $35 million in 1977, as damages. The proceedings of the case will trail in court for almost a year. I gave details of these events in my unpublished work, Fela, the Phenomenon and Legacy. Meanwhile, Fela was prevented from making any further public concert. Armed policemen were posted to prevent or disperse people from any venue advertising a Fela appearance. In order to get some more advance royalty from Decca Records, with whom he had a 12-album-a-year deal, Fela went into the studio to record more albums that would complete his part of the deal. He recorded songs like No Agreement, mentioned earlier. On the flip side, Fela added an instrumental piece titled Dog Eat Dog, with Lester Bowie as guest playing trumpet solo. The latter was among the American delegation to Festa 77. He remained for a short while after other members of the Chicago Arts Assembly had returned to the US. Determined to perform live, Fela reached an agreement with the proprietor of the Crossroad Hotel, Chief Adeniyi, to erect a stage in the courtyard of the hotel. He took advert in leading newspapers to publicize his shows and kept the place alive with his band for about 7 months. Lester Bowie and Hugh Masekela appeared as guest performers during these shows at the Crossroad Hotel. On the political front, a delegation from the African National Congress, ANC, representing the South Africa's liberation movement in exile, present in Nigeria for Festac, also visited Fela. The ANC delegation was headed by Thabo Mbeki, the successor of Nelson Mandela as president of post-apartheid South Africa. Fela's sojourn at the Crossroad Hotel was also the period when Jimmy Cliff was put in jail in Nigeria, arrested over a breach of contract allegation by a Nigerian businessman, Ado Ibrahim. Jimmy had the presence of mind to send word to Fela to come to his aid. Despite his personal setback, Fela was able to settle the Jamaican musicians' problem with the Nigerian law enforcement agents. Jimmy Cliff would later sing the event into a song in one of his many albums titled Have You Heard the News? After about 7 months of playing in the Crossroad Hotel, during which he finished work on the 12th album required of him with his contract with Decca, Fela decided to move his organization to Ghana. Moving to Ghana was necessitated by the burning down in Kalakuta Inferno of the soundtrack of his film Black President. Principal shooting of this film had just been completed during the week preceding the army attack, and the Ghana film industry group responsible for shooting the film had departed Lagos with the film rushes the day before, leaving behind soundtrack. The recorded dialogue, mostly done ad-lib, was burned along with everything in the house. Since the band could not perform anywhere in Nigeria without police or army disrupting the concert, Fela moved to Ghana, taking residence at the Hotel President in 2 areas in Accra. And to supplement the income of his organization, the Africa 70 performed regular shows at the Napoleon Club, owned by his longtime Lebanese friend Faisal Helwani, and Apollo Theatre in Accra. Weeks before Fela's arrival in Ghana, during an all-Ghana University students' demonstration against measures taken by the General Achampong military government, the students were heard chanting the lyrics of Zombie. It was therefore no surprise when the Ghana security learned of a meeting held in an Accra hotel between Fela and leaders of the Ghana University Student Union. At the meeting, Fela advised the students from pitching unarmed students against armed military or police personnel. The recent clash that prompted the meeting was reported to be brutal, with female members of the protesting students allegedly raped by the police, sent to their campuses to disperse the demonstration. Fela made it clear to the student leaders that it was useless to pitch on armed students against armed and undisciplined colonially trained army or police. Fela made it clear to the student leaders that it was useless to pitch on armed students against armed and undisciplined colonially trained army or policemen. He advised that instead of such clashes, the students should peacefully close down and vacate their campuses until their demands were met by the authorities. Heeding Fela's advice, the following day after the meeting, all Ghana universities were closed down by the students, demanding the stepping down of the country's military president as the only condition to reopen the universities.